A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
If you ever wondered if there is real fruit from sponsoring children in refugee camps, our next guest is a walking example of the outcomes from sowing good seed into vulnerable refugee children. Dr. Richmond Wandera is a Compassion graduate from Uganda. It was not until Richmond entered Compassion's Child Development Program at his local church when he was 8 years old that his life and his family changed dramatically. And he is our guest. Dr. Richmond Wandera, welcome along to 2020.
Thank you so much, Neil. It's a joy to be here.
Richmond, your childhood was a very difficult and painful one. Pick up where we're at here in your childhood and that crucial turning point at age 8.
I was only 8 years old when my father was murdered. All lights went out because my mom, she got married as a teenage girl. By the time my mom was 25 years old, she already had 6 children. And she was 100% dependent on my father. But when my father passed, everything changed. She had no education, no skill. All she was looking around and seeing was 6 kids that were now dependent on her. And then when we were kicked out of the house that we lived in, because my father was not around and definitely we couldn't afford it, we ended up in Naguru slum. When we ended up in Naguru slum, everything began to change. Not just the lack of food or clothing or a warm covering in the night, but I was also told I couldn't go to school. It was there that everything changed. I ended up on the street with my family, but God had a very, very unique way of intervening into our lives. God provided through compassion.
What do you remember about being an 8-year-old, going into that slum neighbourhood, the hunger, the fear, no security around you at all? How do you describe that?
There are certain nights and days that stand out to me that literally changed my life. One night, rain began at 2 a.m. and we thought it was an ordinary storm. And you can imagine, in a community like Naguru, there's no electricity, it's dark. And when the rain begins in the middle of the night, a lot of houses are made from tin. So they have this tin roof, and you kind of hear this very cracking sound of the tin bending to the force of the wind. And so it's very scary for kids when it's raining. But for us, one night, and I can never forget this, the central iron sheet of a house was blown off. Neil, I watched as our house became one giant bucket. And I looked at how water levels in the house began to rise. And that night, Neil, I failed to get the English word to describe what I lost that night, but it's something close to dignity. I lost my self-worth and my sense of who I was. And that was just one of the nights. And I remember another day when I was with my sister. My sister Doreen was only 6 at the time. And I used to walk very close to her, and we used to walk together on the street. My brother Richard and Ronald used to take a different path. Raphael and Sharon used to take another path. And we were walking, and I remember one day my sister Doreen, she's 6 years old, and she's slowing down behind me. And I turn around. I'm 8 years old. I'm almost like a parent now. I have to protect her. She's slowing down. We've not had anything to eat since morning. And it's 2 p.m., and I look at my sister, I realize if I don't find food now, I might lose my sister. But I couldn't carry her, didn't have the strength to. I said to Doreen, listen, you sit under this tree and you wait. If anybody tells you to go with them, you scream on top of your voice until I return. Neil, I'm 8 years old.
Meanwhile, there are some people in Australia who have responded to the call to sponsor a compassion child, and finances begin to flow, and there are some compassion scouts out on the streets of Kampala in the slum areas. What's the connecting point here? A compassion person arrives at your home and you're the beneficiary of someone's gift. How did that work?
It was actually the local church. And I think this is the beauty of the Compassions program, is you never find a compassion sign anywhere. You just find the local church. And as a matter of fact, when I first plugged into the Compassion program, I didn't know that it was Compassion sponsoring me. I thought it was the local church that had this amazing program that was reaching out. I knew the pastor, I knew the pastor's workers, and these are the people I knew. It was later on that I understood that actually it was Compassion. And what a beautiful model Compassion has, because it makes the local church the hero. And all I knew was the local church. And I think that's what some people don't quite get when it says when you partner with Compassion, you're actually coming alongside the local church and empowering them to make a difference.
So the local church now is providing for you not just some food on the table, but healthcare and education, the emotional support that you need as a child of 8.
Yep.
How did that feel that somehow or other you were out of the slum environment and you were beneficiary of someone's generosity?
Neil, in order to understand how I felt and what that celebration was, you need to be transported to Africa and see how we celebrate. So I come from the Bagisu tribe, and we do a lot of shoulder dancing, and our women know how to ululate. They say, ah, la, 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 la. It is the loudest sound you could possibly hear. When you hear that sound, you know that's good news. That's what happened at our home when we got news that I had got a sponsor. We ran to the church. It was my first time to step into a church. And there I was told, Richmond, you can now go back to school. This is going to be your project number. Anytime you fall sick, hey, don't run to the church. Don't run to Compassion. Run to any hospital around. All hospitals are supplied with sponsored children's names. They will verify you're sponsored, and guess what? They'll treat you, and don't worry about the bill. Neil, my whole life began to change.
And the sponsor who sponsored you was merely a 15-year-old girl, and you've had connection with her.
Yes. So I was sponsored by a 15-year-old girl called Heather, and we are blown away as a family. What maturity could be given to a 15-year-old to step into this fight against poverty, to decide that she'll live with less so I can live with more, to decide, Neil, that she would live simply so I could simply live. I was amazed at the decision, and I have tried to model that in my current life. And not long after I was sponsored, my sister Doreen, who was 6 at the time, was also sponsored. A beautiful couple from here in Australia, Don and Julie Thompson. Could never forget them because we prayed and gave thanks for them many days of our lives.
So special honour to Don and Julie Thompson here in Australia too. Hey, you excelled in your education because now you were going to school.
Yeah.
Then you eventually went on to university. You trained for the ministry. Now you're an ordained Christian minister and you've just completed PhD studies.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that ride?
Well, it's been an incredible ride. There's just so many people coming alongside me to support me and to make sure that I bring my best contribution to the nation. It just feels surreal. It's my mom is the happiest of all because she didn't think we would make it. But I'm here today, just evidence of proof that one act can make a difference.
And for listeners who are wondering about the fruit of what happens when you sponsor a child, and in this case, Compassion, you went through that education process, you're ordained as a Christian minister, and the very church that brought you in as a oversight to the sponsorship, this is the church you are now leading. Tell us about your church.
Oh, well, Neil, I remember as an 8-year-old walking into this church and being told, this is where your help will come from, and we'll surround you, we'll walk with you, we'll help you know your Creator, we'll help you in school, we'll help you find yourself back to better health. This is the very church I am pastoring right now, and so I get to stand at the doors and welcome children in who are looking for hope and looking for help. And so it's a joy to be in this position right now.
And in your role now, the Compassion sponsors of children that are coming from places like here in Australia, you're now responsible for overseeing the way that those children are now discipled and cared for.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I get a chance to look back into my own journey and my own upbringing into this compassion program, and I realized that, okay, here, this was a very strong part of the program. This was a weak part of the program. And now I'm able to speak into how that gets corrected and how that gets delivered in such a way that the kind of product that we're having today is so much better than before.
And you've gone on to form a new organization called the Pastors Discipleship Network. Mm-hmm. How does that work?
So just to take a step back, so the church in Africa is in trouble. 70% of pastors in sub-Saharan Africa have no theological ministry training. Now, that's a real problem. When you think of the implications of that, there's a statement thrown around that the church in Africa is a mile wide and an inch deep, and many people just stop there. But it's very significant what that means, and most of these pastors without this training don't have that much to offer. And so in founding the Pastors Discipleship Network, I wanted to step into that space and deliver all this training that I had received to many of these pastors who had no access to that level of training. And so it's grown up to become one of East Africa's largest pastor training movement. And it just feels so exciting to see churches move from unhealth to places of health.
And there's a big responsibility now that sits on your shoulders, having been the recipient of the blessing of that child sponsorship through to your education and now your qualifications, your ordination, and now some responsibility over the way the church grows in integrity and to bring some of that discipleship to pastors in your network. What do you say to listeners today who maybe once were compassion sponsors, maybe something has slipped, or they've never sponsored a child before? What's your encouragement? Apart from your amazing story, what do you say to some Aussies who might be thinking about sponsorship now?
Neil, there's never been a time when children need to be connected to a lifeline support than now. COVID decimated our economy. We saw over 200 companies leave. All our small roadside businesses, majority of them were decimated. And so we're in a place where it's not just a high level of unemployment, because when we use the word unemployment, we're thinking of adults. What we don't see is these invisible faces, these voiceless young people running around. These are the children who are mostly impacted by shifts in the economy, this drought that is coming in because of the climate. All these things are affecting these children. And I see every single day in the communities that I am part of, just children, their destiny is robbed from them and them falling into all kinds of malnutrition and then eventually death. There's never been a time more critical than now for people to connect and ask themselves, what can I do to help?
So children who have had their destiny robbed from them, when you sponsor a child through compassion, you're giving back their destiny to them. And it's happening through local churches on the ground in nations like the one you're from, Uganda, and Kampala, the capital city of Uganda. For listeners to connect with Dr. Richmond Wandera and to perhaps even get some more details about how you can sponsor a child through compassion, let me give the Compassion website, compassion.com.au. compassion.com.au. And to connect with Richmond through his Pastors Discipleship Network, it's pdnafrica.org, pdnafrica.org. Richmond Wandera, thank you so much for sharing your heart and your amazing story with listeners today on 2020.
Thank you, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.